Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years now, and it's always been a peaceful place. My yard backs onto a big open field, so I get a nice view of nature out my back windows. The neighborhood itself is quiet, mostly families and retirees. That all changed when Karen moved in next door about a year ago. From the start, I could tell she was going to be a difficult neighbor. On moving day, she instructed the movers to trample all over my flowers to get furniture in through her back door. When I asked her politely not to ruin my garden, she scoffed and said, "They're just flowers, they'll grow back." I wish I'd put my foot down then, but instead I gritted my teeth and resolved to give her the benefit of the doubt. Big mistake. It quickly became clear Karen had little regard for anyone but herself. She let her dogs run wild, leaving them off leash even in unfenced areas. They'd sprint across my yard constantly, doing their business wherever they pleased. When I asked Karen to control her dogs, she dismissed my concerns, saying they were just having fun. One day I was gardening when I saw Karen's two pit bulls barreling towards me full speed. I barely had time to react before they plowed straight into my wheelbarrow, tipping dirt all over the place. I'd finally had enough. I marched over to Karen's house and told her she needed to keep her dogs leashed and off my property. "How dare you!" she yelled. "My dogs have as much right to that yard as anyone else. They're good dogs. They'd never hurt a fly." "They may be good dogs," I replied, "but I don't want them digging up my garden. Please keep them on a leash and on your own property." "I'll do whatever I damn well please," she screamed. "Don't you tell me what to do." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. I could feel my blood boiling as I cleaned up the mess her dogs had made. This woman was unbelievable. I'd tried being reasonable, but it was clear Karen didn't understand civility. From then on, I kept my yard gated so her dogs couldn't get in. If I saw them loose, I'd call animal control right away. Of course, this only escalated things further. One Saturday afternoon, I was reading in my backyard when I heard Karen's back door open. Seconds later, her dogs came barreling around the side of her house towards my fence. "Oh, no, you don't!" I exclaimed, running to shut the gate before they could get in. Karen came stomping after them, red-faced. "Let my dogs in your yard right now," she demanded. I held my ground. "Absolutely not. This is my private property." She got right in my face, screaming obscenities. I didn't budge. Eventually, she gave up and stomped away, muttering angrily under her breath. Victory was short-lived. The very next day, I was out mowing the lawn when a police car pulled up. An officer approached me, saying he was responding to a call about a trespasser on my property. I was flabbergasted. "I'm sorry, officer, there must be some mistake. This is my property." He nodded. "I understand that, sir. The caller claimed you were trespassing in your own backyard." The penny dropped and fury rose inside me. Karen must have called the police after our argument yesterday. I explained the situation to the policeman, showing him my ID and property deed. He was very understanding and even noted Karen's dog nuisance in his report. Just when I thought this neighbor from hell couldn't get any worse, she proved me wrong. The following week, I was sued for property damage. The plaintiff, Karen, she was claiming I had killed her rose bushes by spraying them with weed killer from my yard. Ridiculous. The only spraying I did was on my own plants. She clearly fabricated the whole thing to get back at me. I decided enough was enough. This woman wanted war. I'd give her war. I lawyered up and countersued for harassment, filing a restraining order as well. Karen went ballistic when she was served papers. I could hear her screaming obscenities all afternoon. Too bad for her, I wasn't backing down. In court, Karen's theatrics and fake tears didn't sway the judge one bit, especially not when my lawyer presented evidence of all her antics. The police reports, animal control complaints, even statements from other neighbors about her aggressive behavior. In the end, Karen's case was thrown out completely. Not only that, but I won my harassment countersuit and got a 2-year restraining order against her. The look of shock and outrage on her face as the verdict was read was priceless. Justice was served. I walked out of that courtroom feeling victorious and free. The peaceful harmony of my home was finally restored. Karen was forced to keep her devil dogs leashed and under control from then on. Anytime they got loose in my yard, one call to animal control cost her a hefty fine. She learned her lesson the hard way that she can't bully me around and get away with it. At the end of those 2 long years, Karen's restraining order finally expired. To my great relief, I came home one day to see a for sale sign in her yard. A week later, she was gone. I don't know where she moved, and frankly, I don't care. All I know is the crazy dog lady is out of my life for good. My garden has never looked better. The neighborhood is quiet and tranquil again, and if any other Karens get the bright idea to move in, I'll be ready for them. This old dog has learned some new tricks. Turns out sometimes you really can fight crazy with crazy and win. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So this happened sometime in the 2010s, somewhere in the UK. That's all I'm revealing. I worked for a medium-sized PLC in a small team that worked with the sales department, getting quotes. I had previously worked in another team in a different department in the same company as well. This story also includes elements of malicious compliance. I'll post this there as well. To set the scene, the company had recently had some issues with regulators, and senior management were either oblivious to the damage they were doing or didn't care. They were trying to save costs, but going about it all the wrong way. My team consisted of 6 team members and a manager. We were fairly busy and often helped out on other teams as well, and they would, in turn, help us. This is important for later. So we were all called into a meeting without warning and told that due to declining work tickets, they were laying 2 of us off. They did say 2 people were safe, the manager and his sidekick. They made us reapply for our jobs, including doing a test, following the letter of the law on redundancy, which had nothing to do with our roles. It also became apparent during the process that the company flat out lied, or at the very minimum manipulated the data used to come up with their conclusion of falling ticket numbers. They dropped by 13 from year 1 to year 3. Bear in mind it was a total of several thousand tickets a year. In the end, the company carried on, and 2 team members were removed and made redundant, one of whom took a golden handshake. The other sued the company for various things, not really worthy of mention here, and won. After the dust settled, it also became apparent that the manager secured his sidekick's position despite him being the worst member of the team in terms of work done and work quality. In the weeks after, the entire team was too busy to help other teams, who then stopped helping us. So a huge backlog of tickets also built up. We also got threatened with disciplinary proceedings if our backlog didn't come down, but we were also refused any overtime. During the process, we had also been admonished for skipping steps in getting quotes, steps that often took a significant amount of time and served no purpose. So, me and 2 others remaining, not including the sidekick, who had his nose so far up the manager's rear end it came out of his mouth, decided to do everything by the book, down to every last bullet point. This made the backlog of work even worse, but they couldn't say anything. One week, we had another meeting with HR, the sales director, and our manager to discuss the issues. We all calmly said, "We are sorry, but we have to follow the guidelines and rules laid down, and this is as fast as we can work." We were also asked to start helping out the other teams again, as we should be team players. Again, we said, "We are sorry, but we can't. Our workload is too high, and it's also not in our contracts that we have to do other teams' work." This went on for several months, and management still refused to believe we were overworked. When it was time for holidays, we realized they hadn't changed the number of people allowed off from 3. So we all booked holidays. They both went abroad, and I decided to visit family at the other end of the UK. Of course, when the manager realized a week before, he went nuts and another meeting with HR was called. We all calmly said, "Sorry, but we checked the rules for our team, and 3 people, out of 4 the manager could do what he likes, can be off at any one time." And again, we stood our ground and all went on leave for 2 weeks each. This caused even more chaos at work, as you can imagine. The sales director, after this, hatched a plan to get the Indian teams, we had offices in India and other offshore places, to be trained up by us and to help us. However, they demanded we fly out to spend weeks there training them. Again, we all refused, as it's not in our contracts to be trainers or to have to work abroad. They ignored the fact I didn't have a passport at this point. So poor old manager and his sidekick traveled out and trained them for weeks. Eventually, both stayed for over 2 months and failed to train them. We would send low-effort tickets to them and they would screw it up, and we simply said, "Sorry, to fix this, we need to do it again." So after 6 months, they gave that idea up entirely. After around a year or so of this, I'm being deliberately vague on timing, so please don't ask about it, we all decided to seek other employment, having found we all could not trust the company or manager anymore. And we all found roles elsewhere within a week of each other, so we all handed in our 4-week notices, again to the letter of our employment contracts, and were due to all leave on the same day. Now the female member of the team, who is a very learned person, revealed in all our contracts that any documentation we create is ours, and we can do with it how we wish when we leave. So we hatched a plan. In the final week, we are there. We moved all our digital stuff to one location, including all my manuals and cheat sheets for my previous team. They both did the same with their previous positions within the company. On our final day, we brought in our own external drives, and with IT's help, downloaded and removed all documentation and deleted the copies on the company systems. We all said our goodbyes, and at the end of the day, quite happily told our manager what we had done. He exploded and demanded it back, and we calmly told him not according to the letter of our contracts. This, waving the drives at him, is ours, and we choose to remove it with us. We were later told by friends who remained that the sales director had a fit because now no one was doing quotes for him. Gladly, we all have had great new places and keep in touch. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was a paramedic for 15 years and have since left to pursue a trade. I'm not entirely bitter, I just needed to leave due to burnout. So long, and thanks for all the PTSD, am I right? Anyways, a number of years ago when I was a shift supervisor, I had a 2-time run-in with my city's head Karen. This was a medium-sized city, and as a working supervisor, I would go on calls. We didn't have high call volumes, but like any populated area, we had colorful encounters. One Saturday night, we were called out to a domestic violence incident, which unfortunately happens from time to time. We go to support the police or treat a victim. Family violence is always an unfun night on the town with high emotions mixed in. No one likes going to these, but the worst places to attend calls I've noticed are richer areas of town. This was a suburb of McMansions, ranging from uninspired architecture to god-awful monstrosities of poor taste. There are lots of petrodollars here. Not every household was like this, of course, but sometimes the math worked out thusly. Entitlement plus money plus low class plus no emotional regulation ability, X boozed equals sign. A real circus of dismay for everyone. Arriving at this house for one male in his late 40s, his brother-in-law had assaulted him. His wife, the Karen in our story, wasn't taking his side and would periodically interrupt us to scold or insult him. The argument, whatever it was, had degenerated into lobbed insults by the time we got there, and the 5 adults in the house were being poorly quieted by the police. The incident was a trivial argument escalated to simple assault. A guest called cop. Our patient and his brother-in-law discovered in different ways that expensive wine bottles are resilient and when swung at the head, act more like a club than a piece of prop comedy. When we got to our patient, he was sitting in a chair, lucid but 3 sheets to the wind on white wine like everyone else in the house. He'd been smacked right in the center of the forehead. No loss of consciousness, just a bump and a bleed, stable but intoxicated. During our assessment, we discovered he was on an opioid painkiller that he'd been taking at a 4 times the rate according to the label. My reaction was, "How many of these have you been taking? How many did you take tonight? You should not be taking that much and drinking. Tell me what you took." Opioid overdose thankfully didn't occur. Between the lack of presentation and his wife's loud interjections, I'm confident they were all just sauced. Karen, during our assembly, would butt in and talk over us. I'd shoo her off, she'd circle around again, and repeat. That was until I grew tired and weary of this dance and asked one of the cops to give her a timeout while we worked. Under a fusillade of ugly words, half directed at me and half at the police, she was told her cooperation would be nice but not required. More than enough exposure to this environment made me want to leave. So we packed our patient in the ambulance and finished the call with a drop-off at an ER department. The real fun began the night after when our patient's wife called to launch one doozy of a complaint. Bad luck for both of us, I took that complaint. But good luck for me, she didn't ask for a name and I didn't volunteer it. She got what she wanted, a supervisor. I listened to the litany of complaints without rapt attention, taking notes and bewildered by someone who appeared to hate their husband that much would bother complaining. She used me like a grievance tampon for about 15 minutes, but it boiled down to 3 main points. 1. It was outrageous for paramedics to be giving her husband medication advice because we aren't doctors. A valid point, but she was missing the crux of that line of questioning. His abuse of pills was a going concern. 2. We made her husband, the lightly wounded, walk with us to the ambulance. She knows that's an incredibly incompetent and negligent act by the paramedics because of what she gleaned from her last first aid course. You don't move people with head injuries! After that absolute trombone slide of a sentence, I could barely contain myself. Right, you don't move people. I do that. It's my literal job. 3. She wanted to go in the ambulance, but it drove off without her. Yeah, I did that, and on purpose, while she was in her timeout with an officer. Guess why? There was also some other assorted word garbage, mostly born of impotent, poorly thought-out rage. When she was done venting visceral hate into my ear, I let her know we would be back in touch after an investigation. Following my sense of duty and ethics, I squealed on myself, reporting everything to my chief the next day. I went in early before my shift, laid it all out for him, and invited him with a barely suppressed giggle to investigate fully. With an unimpressed look that segued into an eye roll, he told me to handle it in a professional manner. So, taking his cue, I decided to call up Karen and lie almost nonstop to her. During our follow-up call after the exhaustive investigation, I layered on the fluff and platitudes with a trowel. Had to. It was thick. Karen soaked it all in, and I'm sure nearly climaxed when I mentioned disciplinary action taken. We parted ways and hung up our end of interactions. Satisfied I had properly resolved this issue, I turned to the group of co-workers in the room, listening in while she was on speakerphone. Then we collapsed into laughter. To this day, I'm sure she believes I was punished. I'm also sure it was all because I gave her a timeout in her own gaudy HGTV nightmare. She should look at the scoreboard. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Once upon a time, I was working a seasonal retail job at a craft store chain. It is important to note that for the purposes of their sales, lighted tree toppers, lighted decorations, string lights, etc., were all separate categories. On this fateful day, lighted tree toppers were on sale for 30% off. The rest of the lighted decor on that aisle was not. The sales were very clearly marked, and the sections designated clearly, as well as the category printed on the package itself. It is even listed in the email that Karen was using to present her coupon. Karen approaches my register with her tree topper. The register recognizes the discounts and applies them automatically in most instances. This being no exception, the 30% applies itself. Your total will be $18.9. Karen then presents her 20% off coupon. I'm sorry, ma'am. This coupon is not applicable to sale items. Those aren't on sale. The lights aren't on sale this week. I show the copy of our sale bulletin on my counter. I apologize for the confusion, ma'am. This actually falls under the tree topper category. You'll see here it's 30% off. I won't be able to apply the coupon, but you will be getting the already discounted sale price. I am telling you I don't want any sale. You're going to take my coupon. I should probably mention she was in at least once weekly, yelled about sales and coupons every single time, and then declared she was never coming back, only to be back the following week to do the same. Ma'am, I would have to manually override the sale price and apply the coupon manually as well. Then do it! I'm telling you it is not on sale and I'm using my coupon or I'm reporting you. Yes, ma'am, if you insist. I got visual confirmation from my supervisor in the way of a hand signal we used to mean, go ahead. She was not too happy when I did exactly as she demanded, and her total came to $21.6. You're stealing from me. I demand to speak to a manager. I'm never coming back here again. My shift supervisor had been on the next register over the whole time to combat the afternoon rush. That's how she managed to give the visual approval in the moment. She took great joy herself in telling Karen, you have the exact discounted price you demanded. You can pay it or leave. Oh, you're never coming back, do you promise? Karen paid her $21.6 with her head hung. She was back next week. The next one is an entitled people story. This is the story of my entitled neighbor, Bob. We live in an homeowner association. I know. Bob lives across the green space from us. Bob's entitlement was evident almost from the moment we moved in. About a month after we moved in, the police, sheriff, and DEA came knocking at our door. Bob had called them and told them we had lawn bags full of cannabis in our garage. It's important to note here that I use medical cannabis. Bob runs the local Narcotics Anonymous group. Well, I gave the cops the grand tour of our home, and there was nothing here at all. They apologized for the intrusion and left. A week later, our landlord called because Bob had called him saying we had a grow operation going here. Our landlord knew he was lying because the landlord had just been here. Bob was trying to get us out of the neighborhood because he can't have that stuff in his neighborhood. He gave up on that when my daughter and her husband purchased the property. Then he started with the constant complaints and demands. We weren't allowed to feed the squirrels because it made a mess. We couldn't plant clover because it might get in his yard. We had to mow more frequently because he mows twice a week, and we only mowed once and it looked bad. The list goes on and on. He mows the green space between our houses every time he mows his lawn, killing all the wildflowers, and tells people they can't walk there because he mows it, so it's his. The worst of his entitled behavior started 2 years ago. He decided he was going to stop using his furnace and burn wood instead. Now, I have lung cancer and my next-door neighbor has COPD, so this was really bad. In January 2022, we had a stagnant air warning, which means you can only use wood stoves or fireplaces if that is your only source of heat. Bob didn't care, and the thick smoke from his wood stove blanketed the neighborhood. One morning, I woke up unable to breathe. My daughter called for an ambulance. I stopped breathing and had to be intubated. I spent 6 days in a medically induced coma and another week in the hospital. My kids tried talking to him, I tried reasoning with him, but he didn't care. He said he was allowed to heat his house any way he saw fit. We called the county. They told him his wood stove was outdated and needed to be replaced. He said he would replace it, but 2 years on, it still has not happened. The final straw for me was when another neighbor and I had an argument. It was all of 2 minutes and resolved the next day. He came over screaming at me because he was not putting up with the stuff in his neighborhood. Then he screamed at me that it was not fair that I got disability, cancer, and he had to work all day. A month later, he was suddenly in too much pain to work. He went on disability from his job, spending his time climbing on his roof, working on his motorcycles, mowing his yard every other day, and generally just enjoying not having to work. Someone he worked with turned him in for fraud, and we had investigators out here taking pictures of his activities around his house. I made sure to have a chat with them myself. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.